Hello everybody, thank you for joining me today. I do truly appreciate it. And I want to talk about a new book from stephengrahamjones. A new book as in it's not even published yet. That is called The Buffalohunterhunter. And I read it on Kindle. I was fortunate enough to be able to get a digital ARC. And now being new to the Kindle deal, I borrowed it from my wife, and so I was able to read this book. I pre-ordered it already. I pre-ordered a signed edition. I pre-ordered mine from Barnes & Noble, and I think I'm stumbling now trying to remember, did I already pre-order a limited edition from SST Publications? I can't remember. They publish limited editions of all of stephengrahamjones' books, and I'm just trying to remember, did they already offer that one up for sale or not? If they have not, I definitely will buy it on day one. Goose, know what I'm saying? But anyway, about this book, The Buffalohunterhunter is stephengrahamjones stretching out a little bit. So we've read books from his slasher books, a series of slashers, the Indian Lake trilogy, and those fabulous series of books. We've also read, he's also written sort of a shapeshifter werewolf sort of book with mongrels. Another great one. That's the first book of his I read. And now we're into vampires, or a sort of vampire. And also factoring in historical fiction. So stephengrahamjones is a Blackfeet Indian from what I understand. And he tends to include that, his history, his heritage, in practically everything I've read of his. Somehow or another, that's interwoven into his storytelling, sometimes directly, and this is an example of it being directly interwoven into his storytelling. And jumping right in, The Buffalohunterhunter. I really enjoyed this book, and to go back, it's really sort of three stories interwoven. And so we start with Etsy Bokarn, and I'm sure I'm saying the name wrong, and if not, then it's just lucky. Etsy Bokarn, a 42-year-old white lady working at a college, and she's hoping for tenure, and she's hoping that she could write something great, win an award, get her tenure, and something falls into her lap. Coincidentally, she gets notice that on a construction site, inside of a wall, there is a journal that was written by her great-great-grandfather, and so she's called on to help to transcribe it. And so her goal here is to be able to do this and earn her tenure on her job. And so there is where we start. And now she's trying to transcribe this journal from her great-great-grandfather, written in 1912. She's in 2012, 100 years later, trying to transcribe it. And then that's when we go back to the journal, to her great-great-grandfather, Arthur Bokarn, as he is telling this story. And it's in parts, essentially every Sunday. He's a Lutheran pastor, and he has a visitor. After services, a visitor. A Blackfeet Indian comes in wearing dark sunglasses and covered up. He comes in and he says he wants to do a confessional. He wants to confess, but Arthur tells him that this is Lutherans, we don't do that. But we can sit here in a pew and tell me what you want to tell me. So they start off, and it's Sunday after Sunday. It's broken down. He'll tell a little bit, and then Arthur will tell about his stuff going on, and then he'll go back and tell more of the story from this Blackfeet Indian who goes by multiple names. He's been given multiple names throughout. Good Stab is probably the most used name throughout, but also he's known as Full Blood, and also known as Takes No Scalps, and then he has other names from his childhood. But he's telling him his story, kind of from childhood on up to a point where he and some other members of, they call themselves Pikuni. Maybe I'm saying that wrong. Amskapi Pikuni. But they say Pikuni a lot. They're referring to his people, essentially, his group, his tribe, his clan, his Pekuni, their his family. Refers to him a lot, and so he and several others are out, and they find a wagon that's been attacked, and it seems as though it's been set up, it's faked to look like the Pekuni have attacked this wagon. And they also find in a cage a Napaquan, which is what they call the white people. A Napaquan in a cage, but he's wild and crazy, and he's got fangs, and they end up calling him the Cat Man. And while they're there, soldiers come up and shoot them all to heck, and one of his friends releases the Cat Man. The Cat Man goes out and kills everybody. Kills everybody. In fact, he rips into Good Stab, and in the process, some of he's shot all to heck. The Cat Man is shot into pieces with his big cannon, blown to smithereens, if you will. Some of his blood falls into Good Stab's mouth before he dies. We think he dies. Turns out Good Stab, like the Cat Man, becomes a vampire, with a different type of a vampire, but a bloodsucker who will essentially live forever, living off of the blood. And there's some pretty cool things about that. I don't want to tell, because it's neat. I enjoyed finding these things out as I read, so I won't tell some of the cool aspects of the vampire, which I don't think they use the word in the book, but some cool aspects of this. It's a little bit different, although very familiar. And he slowly unfolds his life to Arthur Bocarn in these weekly confessionals as a vampire, as Good Stab, and the difficulties and things like that. And then, throughout this process, we not only are learning Good Stab's life, but we're slowly getting Arthur Bocarn, this Lutheran pastor. He's about 70-ish. We slowly start to get little hints that in his past there are not some sins, some not good things. And then the story progresses, and I don't want to get too much into that kind of stuff, but it's in the end we come back to Etsy and we see how it's all tied in together. And it really, ultimately, it's a combination of historical fiction, a historical event where a large number of Blackfeet Indian were slaughtered. It brings back the buffalo hunters killing off the buffalo, in what we believe anyway, killing off the buffalo so that the Native Americans wouldn't have anything to eat. I don't know, but it brings that into play. And then also revenge, and this revenge is the essence of this story. It's all about making amends. But that's all. I don't want to give too much away. That's the gist of the story. And Stephen Graham Jones is a special kind of storyteller. He's I think one day, if he keeps going like he's been going, one day people will say there's a Stephen Graham Jones genre or a Stephen Graham Jones style. It's not comparable to anything else I've read. And he does a lot of the excellent genres in horror, but he tells the stories in such a way that there's nothing like it. It can't be compared to any other writer that I've ever been exposed to. So I think one day, like Joe Lansdale says, there's the Joe Lansdale style, and that's true. You're gonna ask anybody, Joe Lansdale, what's he all about? There's nothing you can compare him to help somebody understand. You just got to read Joe Lansdale, and I think Stephen Graham Jones is the same way. He just doesn't have as many years behind him as a published author, but he's on a tear. And I think one day they'll say it's the Stephen Graham Jones style. And it's a style of writing, for me, I think, that kind of makes me work. There's authors where you read and you just nuzzle in and it's like the story unfolds before your eyes. You're not even reading. It just is like it's being told to you. Stephen Graham Jones requires a little bit of work for me. And I find myself sometimes thinking, did I miss something? Only to find it being revealed to me later on. But he's got a terrific style. And the first one I ever read of his was Mongrels. And I struggled at first with mongrels. At first I did. I couldn't really get into the story. And what I did was I went and I watched interviews on YouTube, Stephen Graham Jones talking. And hearing him talk, I was then able to go right back into mongrels and get it. Get his voice, get his storytelling method. And he writes a lot like he talks. I bring up Joe Lansdale because it's the same way. You hear Joe Lansdale talk, and then you go read a Joe Lansdale story and you hear it in his voice, and it really makes a lot of sense. And Stephen Graham Jones, to me, is the same way. You hear him talk for a little while, then you go and read his story, and boom, it clicks. The cadence, the way he talks, the way he kind of jerks and twitches in the story from this to that and back again. And I don't want to say that in an insulting way. It's just understanding how he writes really, really helps. But as a writer, he's one of my favorite writers these days, Stephen Graham Jones. And if I live long enough, I'll read all of his books. And when a new one comes out, I'm going to read it, put it on the list. I've gotten that much faith in the author. And so when I rate the Buffalohunterhunter out of 5 stars, I give it a very solid 4 stars. It's not my favorite Stephen Graham Jones book, but it's up there. I haven't read them all, but when I rate them, I still put Mongrels as my favorite. And then I think I have My Heart as a Chainsaw as my second favorite in this, so I'd probably put it as third on the books of his that I've read. I liked it a lot, and I would recommend it strongly. It incorporates so many cool things in storytelling into a book that is ultimately, it involves a vampire, but it's ultimately about revenge, sins of the past, how those things don't just necessarily heal over time, they don't just necessarily go away, and stuff like that. But it's a great book. I do recommend it. I always will tell somebody, go listen to a Stephen Graham Jones interview. Just pull him up on YouTube. Listen to him talk about a book you want to read. Listen to him talk about that book, that specific book, a little bit, and then go read that book. And I think you will, just like I did, really enjoy it, really feel it and understand it more. You probably will understand his thinking when he's telling a story, the things he cares about, the things he's worried about and stuff like that. It really helps. But I recommend the Buffalohunterhunter. I can't wait to get copies on my shelves, of course signed, because signed is better. And add to this Stephen Graham Jones collection here. It's growing. It's growing. I've got some really cool stuff here, and he's got about 1.5 tiny shelves in my my bookcase here. But I've got several pre-ordered that I'm just waiting on the publishers to get them done. And before you know it, eventually I'll have to start moving other junk out of the way to make more room for Stephen Graham Jones, which is a good thing. Well, because that means he's writing more stuff, publishers are publishing more stuff, and I get to add cool stuff to my collection and get to read some great stuff as well. But anyway, I can think of no more lies to tell, so thank you for your time. I do truly appreciate it, and say la vie, baby. My wife's Kindle. She's still nice enough to let me use it, but one of these days I think she's gonna pull the plug and say, get your own Kindle, boy. And I have to go do it. I'm starting to dig this thing.